Hi everybody, welcome to today's webinar on egg weight loss. My name is Eline and I'm an incubation specialist at Royal Postreform. Now, before I start this presentation, I want to say a few things. There are going to be some polls in this presentation that you can respond to. And if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out and ask them in the chat. Now, I already know what the most frequently asked question is going to be. And the answer is yes, you will receive the handout and a replay link after this webinar. Now, what am I going to talk about today? As you might have noticed already, the subject is egg weight loss. So I'm going to talk about why it's important to monitor egg weight loss. I'm going to talk about water regulation in the egg, some influences on egg weight loss, how to measure it, and of course, the most important part is how to use egg weight loss. As always, I'm going to end with a summary. Now, I always like to start my presentations with a question, and today is no different. So, are you currently measuring egg weight loss in your hatchery? Yes or no question. And while you are answering that question, I'm going to tell you why it's important to do so. So, why is it so important to monitor egg weight loss? Well, first off, it's a routine monitoring for controlling the incubator humidity. By checking the weight loss, we know if the humidity in the incubator was correct, maybe too low or maybe too high. Now, if it is too low or too high, or suboptimal, now you know it, and also you can do something about it. Next to this, egg weight loss is also essential for internal egg balance and for the formation of the air cell. Now, I think it's a well-known idea. I read it everywhere online, so I'm not the only one thinking this. We all agree eggs should lose about 11 to 13% of their initial weight during the first 18 days of incubation. If we see suboptimal weight loss, so very high or very low weight loss, this can actually lead to increased embryonic mortality and also lower chick quality. Now, I'll get back to that later in the presentation. So before we start to talk about egg weight loss itself, I think it's important to look at the water regulation within the egg. So where is all this water coming from? So when I ask people, everyone always tells me the water is evaporating from the egg to the environment. And of course, they're correct, but there is more to it. Because water has to come from somewhere, and we all know eggs are not filled with water. But luckily, the internal fluids do contain water. And through internal movement between different compartments in the egg, water can continue to evaporate to the environment. So we see evaporation from the egg to the environment, but also internal movement between the different compartments in the egg. Now, there's a very nice article written about this by R.N. Ramon in 1980. So all these graphs show the changes in the water and the solid fractions during incubation. Now, the left graph shows us an incubated egg without embryo development. So we see that the amount of solids is actually becoming greater over time as the water is evaporating. The middle picture is an egg with a growing embryo inside, but without the possibility of evaporation. And the first two graphs are actually combined in the last graph. So during the start of incubation of an egg, more water is evaporating from the egg than is being produced. This is the green line that we see in the right picture. Now, this egg is simply losing water by evaporation because the embryo inside is not producing metabolic water yet. Now, I hear you thinking, what exactly is metabolic water? Well, this refers to the water created inside a living organism through their metabolism by using energy-containing substances. So, their food, and in the embryo's case, it's the yolk. However, when the embryo starts to grow exponentially, it starts to produce metabolic water. And during this time, more water is produced than being evaporated. and this is the blue line. After this phase, the water concentration in the egg decreases again, as now the chick has begun pipping. So until the phase of external pip, the orange line, we see that at the end of incubation, the egg still contains the same amount of water as in the beginning. So how did that work? The water just basically moved. So the water moves from the albumin and the yolk to the chick itself. Now let's take a closer look. During incubation, we of course have a growing embryo. But next to that, we also have extra embryonic tissues. So looking at this figure, on the axis we see the volume in milliliters and the day of incubations. And in the graph we see all different compartments of the egg itself. So this figure basically shows differences throughout the incubation period. So similarly as the graph before, there are changes in the fluid compartment within the egg, such as if we look closely, we can actually see that the subembryonic fluid starts to increase very rapidly in the first few days, but then decreases very rapidly too. And while it's actually decreasing, we see that the amnion and the allantois are actually starting to increase in volume. So there's a nice experiment done by Davis in 1988, and he actually looked at the differences between a very high and a very low weight loss in eggs. What he found was actually that in low weight loss, the chickens actually didn't really change that much in their wet and their dry mass after hatch if we compared them to normal weight loss. But they did always show an excess in albumin in the egg. So these eggs that did not lose that much water, the chick quality was not changed that much, but there was an excess albumin found inside the egg. Now, if we look at a very high weight loss, he actually found dehydration as a direct effect. So now that we know a little bit more about what is going on inside the egg, let's see what it actually influences the egg weight loss itself. So let's first start with the eggshell. There are some few main factors. First thing I like to say is the conductance. The conductance of the egg is actually the resistance of the eggshell to diffuse water. Now this eggshell of course also has pores. We see it on the picture on the right. More pores equals more evaporation. So through these pores, water, oxygen and carbon dioxide diffuse. And this diffusion rate is determined by the number of pores, but also the water vapor pressure. And the water vapor pressure of an egg is actually determined by the difference in relative humidity within the egg, which is always 100% because this is wet, and the relative humidity of the external environment. So that would mean if we would incubate the egg in a very low humidity, there would actually be more water vapor going on. Last and not least, I think everybody will agree with this, is cracks. If we have eggs that show any type of cracks, no matter how minimal this might be, we always see that cracks lead to a higher water loss. Now this is actually a very nice trial that a colleague of mine did. She looked at the eggshell quality, specifically the eggshell mottling, and that this can lead to extreme water loss in individual eggs. So if we take a look at this graph, we see the egg weight loss over 18 days, and we also see the hatch of fertile. Now the degree of eggshell mottling, the number 1 was the highest eggshell mottling, and the number 4 is actually the lowest eggshell mottling. Now, if we take a closer look at this high amount of eggshell mottling, we see that the weight loss is way bigger than that we see in the others. We also see that the hatch of fertile drops. Now, what else is influencing the egg weight loss? Also, of course, the environment in which the egg is. So the incubation profile. If we're talking about incubation profiles, we're always talking about temperature. Now, if we have a higher temperature, we would also see a higher evaporation of water from the egg. If we start to ventilate is not only the addition of refreshing of air and oxygen, but it's also actually dehumidification of the air itself. And lastly, of course, relative humidity itself in the incubator. Now, how can we control relative humidity? And this is actually a very difficult one, because we see that the relative humidity is naturally more fluctuating than other parameters, such as temperature. So the first thing we do, of course, if you have an incubator that has this possibility, we want to set a set point for relative humidity. But it's not as easy as that sounds, because humidity is actually added by multiple things. So we have the moisture that is leaving from the egg going to the environment, which increases the relative humidity in the setter. We also have water from the humidifiers that can actually add relative humidity. But sometimes, and we do not always think about it, but if we take a look at your hatchery, probably someone would clean the corridors, or there's water being distributed that can also influence the relative humidity within the setter. Now we can decrease the humidity by ventilation. Now, what about linear versus non-linear weight loss? There are two ways of getting your wanted weight loss. This linear and a non-linear profile. So the left graph shows a relative humidity profile, where blue is a linear line, red is the non-linear, and green in between. So if you use multi-stage, you have no other option than a linear profile. This is because we need to satisfy different ages of eggs at the same time. Now, if you're using single stage, we can actually alter this program to a non-linear weight loss, or a so-called fine-tuning program. So if we have one set point, we have a linear line. On the right side, we see weight loss profiles. We see that if we have one set point of relative humidity, we see a clear linear line in the weight loss profile. If we use multiple set points, we actually see a curved line. So this is a very important factor to keep in mind when we start measuring the egg weight loss. If we have a non-linear egg weight loss profile, the eggs will actually lose a little less water in the beginning, so they have to catch up later on. So how do we measure egg weight loss? We need to mark and weigh a tray. So we need to mark and weigh an empty tray to know what the weight of this tray is. Then we're going to fill it up with eggs. We're going to weigh it once more. And at transfer, we're also going to weigh the same tray. Be aware that you only use good quality eggs, because there are some incidences that we have cracked eggs that can actually have a very high moisture loss. And that would actually screw a bit with the data. Of course, we're going to have random distribution in the machine, or consciously not, if you suspect somewhere to be an issue. And also make it a standard procedure. If you're having to do this multiple times, you're more likely to get data that you can compare. Make sure you use the weight of the eggs only if you calculate it. So we want to extract the weight of the tray from the total weight. The tray cannot lose weight, so it would be unfair to actually take this into the equation. Also, do not remove any eggs between the first weighing and the weighing at the transfer, unless they are clearly broken. So what is the calculation exactly for weight loss? So we need to calculate the weight of the eggs before incubation minus the weight of the eggs at transfer, and divide that by the weight of the eggs before incubation. And that will give you your weight loss. So when should we do this? I would say do this on a routine basis to obtain a hatchery-specific reference data, but also as an early warning. If you were to calculate egg weight loss at every hatch, you would actually see a problem very soon on. And sometimes we need to do it to find a problem. If we think we have a problem, we need to go and find the cause and take correct action. And in consequence, we also need to measure the weight loss of, again, to see the effect of this action, whether it actually helped. Now I hear you thinking behind your screens, how many should I weigh? Because this is always an issue. You don't want to weigh too many because time is an issue, but you don't want to weigh too less because then you will not get representable data. So let me explain by this example. We see here a trial done to see the weight loss of multiple individual eggs. And one thing that strikes me immediately is that there is a very large difference. So we see in this graph eggs that are losing 6.5% weight loss. We also see 14.5%. So the difference in egg weight loss is actually pretty big. Though we still say, and I actually mentioned it before, that the optimum is actually 12. So let me tell you why the average is so important. So if we take a look at this graph, we see a certain curve happening, a form. And due to this form of the curve, we also know where the edges are. And these edges are actually causing the problem. So chicks can hatch through a big range of weight loss differences, but the extremities, they will actually not hatch. And because we know this curve, we can actually move, by saying you move the average, we move the whole curve. So the dotted line that we see in this graph is actually a weight loss with an average of 10. Be wary that there are big differences still, but the average is 10. And if we were to move this whole curve to an average of 12%, we actually see that the extremities are moving as well. And now we actually remove the risk of a very low egg weight loss. So we see that we moved from 6% as the lowest to about 8%. So we're actually escaping this danger zone of below 6. Now I know it's not a crowd favorite. I always talk about recording forms. It needs to be done though, because otherwise there's simply no data to compare it with. And we still don't know, or we wouldn't know, whether there's something going on or something that it would be deviating from before. Now another way to look at egg weight loss, how to determine whether your egg weight loss is correct, is through chick quality. Now, I've said it before, we can actually have too low egg weight loss or too high egg weight loss. And some things that we would see with too low weight loss is actually a late hatch. So these chicks would actually hatch later on, and so these chicks would actually be quite fresh at pulling time. We also see a high late embryonic mortality, and these chicks often show wet-like, so wet dead-in-shell chicks. This wetness comes from the albumin that hasn't evaporated yet. Now if we take a look at too high egg weight loss, we actually see the vice versa, the early hatch. So these chicks actually hatch earlier, so they would be in the hatcher for longer too. So these would actually show dehydrated. We also see, again, a high number of pipped dead-in shells. We can also take a look at chick yield. Now chick yield is to evaluate chick pulling time and to compare chick quality. Now you need to be aware that chick yield is as well about moisture loss during incubation, but also the conditions after hatch. So in the hatcher, they play a role. So for example, if your weight loss is correct, but your chick yield is not, the incubation is too long. But the target is 66 to 68%. However, we can play around with this target a little bit. So if we would know that the chicks would need a long transport time, we could actually pull these chicks a little bit earlier, or maybe increase the relative humidity in the setter already, so that we actually would get a higher chick yield. Now this table is courtesy of Aviagen, and you can see that low chick yield is actually a sign of long incubation time, or high incubation temperature, or low incubator humidity. And if we take a look at high chick yield, it's either too short incubation time, maybe low incubation temperature, or high incubation relative humidity. Now, a poll. Where do you think the pipping line should be on the eggshell? So I have here 3 different types of eggs. So we have A, B, or C, and we have 3 different pipping lines. So pipping line of egg A is around the equator, B is a little bit above that, and C is a little bit above B again. Now, I hope you all answered. The pip line should be around 2/3 of the egg if we look from the tip of the egg. So otherwise it would be 1/3 of the blunt side. So picture B would be the correct one. This is a picture of how it would actually look like in practice. So I don't know who it was, probably a colleague, had in his hand 2 different eggshells. And we can actually see that the eggshell above has a very low pipping line in comparison to the bottom one. Now, I've talked a lot about egg weight loss, and I can already see the hatchery managers going, so what? What do we now? What do we use it for? Well, it's really easy. After all this weighing of eggs and looking at chicks, looking at eggshells, hopefully right now we have a clue on whether the egg weight loss is actually correct, or maybe it's too low or too high. And all we have to do now is to adjust the incubation profile. So we need to select a relative humidity profile that actually allows for optimum weight loss with the lowest possible humidification. And that leaves me to the last part, the summary. So in summary, there are multiple factors influencing the egg weight loss, such as the eggshell itself, but also the environmental conditions. Now, there are signs of suboptimal egg weight loss that we can actually look for, like lower hatchability or a lower chick quality. And ultimately, the egg weight loss data can be used to optimize your incubation profile. So thank you very much for watching. We will send you the webinar replay and the handout later today. The knowledge section at our website is very useful as well. We have a couple of written reports there about egg weight loss. And I hope to see you at our next webinar.
Royal Pos Reform for the highest number of best quality chicks.